Hello, my name is Adam, and I'm attempting to be the most prolific reviewer of all time. My tripod is broken, and I realized that the cord for my microphone is doing some weird things, but that doesn't prevent me from having an opinion about the movie which I am reviewing today, which is called Mildred Pierce. So, Mildred Pierce came out in 1945 and stars Joan Crawford. And for many people, including Joan Crawford herself, this movie is considered to be her best performance. And I think that Joan Crawford is a very interesting actress because she was a huge star in Hollywood. And she was a huge star because of the way that she looked, and she was quite attractive. Although I think now she would be probably not considered to be as attractive just because of her eyebrows, which were quite unique. But anyway, she's quite charming. She is very photogenic. Her kind of face soaks up the screen, if that makes any sense. So her acting it doesn't have to be great, you know. And when she was working in a movie called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane later in her career with Betty Davis was critical, saying that she wasn't a great actress. But the style of Joan Crawford's acting is completely different than the style of Betty Davis's acting. And you could say technically Betty Davis is a better actor, but Joan Crawford has this sort of movie star charisma that is also interesting and unique in movies. But is this actually a good movie? Is Mildred Pierce a good movie? I think that Joan Crawford's performance in it is good, but I don't think it carries the movie. And I think that there are a few reasons for that. The movie is based on a novel. Well, let me tell you what happens in the movie. So, what happens in the movie is that um, Mildred begins the story in the police. So, there's a murder, and Mildred attempts to frame her uh, colleague and friend, but also somewhat of a sexual creep to her, Wally, for this murder, even though he didn't do it. And in the end, it's her daughter who did it, her daughter Veda, and her daughter Veda has been like extremely materialistic throughout the entire film, and basically she's done very kind of immoral things to get money and to have a higher status because she's ashamed of her mother, which is weird because her mother broke up with her father because her father didn't have a job and, was having an affair, but was generally an okay guy. And so Mildred established this chain of restaurants, like 4 or 5 different restaurants, which basically was on her way to becoming a proto McDonald's, I guess. So one of those, maybe not McDonald's, maybe like one of those fast food chains with established history. So she was starting a fast food chain at this time. So she was making a lot of money, but she gets married to this one guy uh, basically because she wants to get the respect of her daughter. And uh, that guy cheats her out of her empire because he has a lot of debt. And basically, he's cheating her out of her empire, and her daughter is having an affair with him, even though that he's married to her mother. And so she finds out, like Mildred finds out about this, and her daughter throws it in her face, like, yeah, yeah, we're gonna get married. And the guy's like, no, no, we're not gonna get married. I'm just using you like I'm using your mother. And then the daughter shoots him. So that's the story in the film. And they changed a few things which don't actually make sense. So they changed the um, no one gets murdered in the novel, and the reason no one gets murdered in the novel is because the novel is much more about surviving in the Great Depression and how the Mildred makes all of these sacrifices to for her daughter, and her daughter is just um, not grateful at all for those sacrifices because she's very materialistic. So that change, they're trying to make it into like a noir film, but and the reason they did that is because the code, the Hayes Code, which was in effect at the time, said that a person who does evil needs to be punished, and so I guess the character who did the most evil was the one who was murdered, and her daughter gets sent off to prison. I'm not sure she goes to prison in the novel. Um, she can still go to prison in the movie, and it would make sense, but I just think that the murder kind of detracts from the actual real story of the film, which is this relationship between the mother and the daughter. And that doesn't work well, also, because the film, I think it's about a 4 year period, and the very first reaction that Veda has to finding out that her mother and father are getting divorced or getting separated is like, oh yeah, good. Now now you can get me more stuff, right? Because divorced moms in the 30s, yeah, sure, they have a lot of money, right? And Veda is probably like 13, 14 at this time. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that that would be her first reaction. Um, you can see that she is like very. I guess the point is that she's materialistic, but I think the writing makes it like divorce happens, Veda asks for money, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And there's another scene where Veda's sister dies due to pneumonia, and there is grief there. There's like legitimate grief between the sister, the mom, the dad, and so why not have the divorce happen the same way? Like, yeah, I'm sad about it, and then later you can build on the whole thing. Another thing that doesn't really make much sense is Veda is portrayed as being in the film someone who doesn't have a lot of talent, right? She gets these expensive dancing lessons, or I guess that's her sister. She gets these expensive piano lessons and singing lessons because that's what she wants, but she's not actually good at singing. And later there's a scene where she's in sort of a bar and she's singing for some sailors, and her voice is horrible, but she's getting catcalls because she's attractive, and her mom is like, you know, dying of embarrassment and stuff. So she has this sort of pretension towards her mother that her mother actually works. So first she's embarrassed that her mother works selling cakes, and then she's embarrassed that her mother works at this restaurant, and then she's embarrassed that her mother owns the restaurant, just because basically she's a classist, I guess, and she she wants to be like super super rich, but without having any of the money, like without doing any of the work to be super super rich. And the guy who gets murdered, he's basically from a family where um, you know they 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 maybe made some investments, and now he has lived this kind of dilettante playboy lifestyle, and he's run out of money. So his attitude is kind of similar, like, oh, people who work are horrible, whatever. But in the case of Veda, it doesn't make any sense, because the only reason Veda has any money is because her mom worked so much, right? So that doesn't make any sense. And in the novel, Veda is actually talented and manipulative herself. So it makes sense that she would manipulate her mother, but in the film, her mother is by far the stronger character. And so it doesn't make any sense for her to be like, yeah, I'm going to give you all this money. And there's a famous scene where Veda has basically extorted $10,000 from this guy that she hooked into marrying. And so Mildred's reaction is to slap her, which is probably if you know anything about Joan Crawford, this is probably the scene that you've seen where she slaps the daughter and rips up the check. So it's a great scene and everything, but she has that kind of powerful personality Mildred does. So why is Mildred in any of this situation? It doesn't make any sense. She's duped by people with the strategic intelligence of I don't know, a mayfly or something. So yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So the biggest flaws are the murder plot because it's just an addition, the lack of context because you know these so it kind of makes sense if Mildred was successful after the Second World War because it was a post-war boom, right? But if she's successful before the First World War during the Great Depression, that takes a lot more skill, right? So that's one thing. And the relationship between Mildred and her mother, Veda and Mildred. Veda's character just doesn't make any sense. It's not really believable. But so I would say the movie itself is not great, but watching the performance of Joan Crawford as Mildred is really, really good. It's been sort of mocked and made into camp versions, but the actual performance is not camp. It's good acting. Yeah. So that's what I think. What do you think? If you want to give your opinions, please give your opinions in the comment section down below. If you like what I do, please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening on Spotify, please give us a follow. Thank you. Bye bye.